This is our final lecture on Chapter 8. This will be lecture number 5, and in this lecture we will discuss Southern Africa. Southern Africa, development and transition. There are 10 states considered part of the region of Southern Africa. This region contains 25% of the sub-Saharan land area and 13% of the population. It has a subtropical environment in general, and is known for a wealth of mineral resources. It has been experiencing transformation of social, political, and economic structures in its post-colonial periods. This region has a varied climate. The east coast is warmed by the Mozambique Current. The west coast is current by the Benguela Current. Altitude, of course, modifies the climate. And there's an annual rainfall variation where rainfall exceeds 60 inches in the Drakensberg and Cape mountain ranges, but only 10 inches in the western coastal regions. East of those coastal regions are a little drier than that. South Africa in general has humid temperatures in the south central region and Mediterranean climate in the southwestern corner. Drought is a major problem, especially in the west and central sections of Southern Africa. Angola and Mozambique, the colonial effects. These countries share a long history of colonial exploitation and civil strife. Portuguese held these countries as colonial holdings, and they did not gain immediate independence like British and French colonies did. There was a protracted social struggle. These countries were divided into districts or conscriptions. There was forced contractual labor. Land was seized from the African indigenous populations, obviously creating a lot of social tension. As a result, these countries became insurgent states. Insurgent states are states that are marked by revolt, insurrection, and guerrilla activity, all which oppose the established authority, in this case, the Portuguese colonial authorities. Both gained independence in 1975, and both at that time were among the lowest literacy rates in Africa. Angola can be known as a shatter belt region during this post-colonial period. It was a region characterized by intense political discord and subjected to external pressures and influence. In some senses, it was a Cold War front as forces, both pro and anti-communist, battled for the region. The popular movement for the liberation of Angola was supported by the Soviet Union and by Cuba, and the National Union for the total independence of Angola was supported by the United States and South Africa in opposition to the potential expansion of communist governments. The popular movement of the liberation of Angola purchased military weapons in this civil war from oil sales to the United States in order to fight the National Union for Total Independence of Angola. So in essence, the United States oil purchases, the profits from those oil purchases were used against the U.S. intentions politically in the region. The Benguela Railroad, which was an important transportation passageway for both passengers and mining interests, was frequently a target of attacks during the Civil War period. The Civil War ended in 2002 with the Luanda Accords. Mozambique, in a similar vein, had the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, which were socialist, communist, opposed Portuguese rule. Once again, this was in reaction to the brutal and extreme colonial exploitation from the Portuguese. Opposition to this group was the Mozambique National Resistance, and this group was supported by Rhodesia and South Africa, once again concerned about the spread of communism in Southern Africa. A general peace agreement was reached here in 1992. Post-colonial Angola and Mozambique. Both countries were war weary and both needed significant international assistance. There was a need to restore the deteriorated infrastructure for both countries. They needed to increase investments in education and health and encourage privatization of industry. Angola needed to implement a broad sweeping strategy of banking regulations. They needed to capitalize on the advantages due to specific minerals and raw materials available in Angola. Angola's economy relies on resource extraction today. Oil provides 50% of the gross domestic product. Diamonds are not very close to that percentage, but are second in terms of the economy of resource extraction. Subsistence agriculture in Angola results in the need to import many of the food requirements. Mozambique's economy has been growing based on foreign direct investment and resource extraction, as well as the sales of hydroelectric power to neighboring countries. Both these countries have the need to diversify economic activities. Namibia, dilemmas of a newly independent state. This country, formerly known as Southwest Africa, gained independence in 1990 after 75 years of South African domination. South Africa moved into this region using the excuse of protecting itself from communist expansion in Angola and unrest in that neighboring country. South African domination resulted in the legacy of racial and socio-economic segregation of many of the tribal and ethnic groups. They divided ethnic loyalties in order to maintain control of the region. There was a deteriorating manufacturing base. The country garnished high debt burdens. It has high unemployment, or had high unemployment, and was highly extractive and poorly integrated economy, resulting in that deteriorated economic system. It's a fairly sizable country, but has a small population. It is well endowed with mineral resources. Development policy now aims at promoting education and expanding trade. It needs to expand infrastructure and diversify its economy, which is currently based primarily on diamond and uranium mining being the most important economic activities. The Namibian population of the Northern Plateau, the Ovambo is the largest ethnic group, as well as the group that has the greatest governmental powers, and is about 50% of the total population. The remainder of the population is primarily Kavangos and Caprivian. There is some European population remaining in the region, kind of a remnants of colonial periods. Of the 2.4 million people in the region, about 6% are of European heritage. These include largest populations in central and southern highlands of Namibia, and these groups include the Afrikaners, Germans, and British. In general, today, Namibia needs to have stronger government support from some of these minority populations. Now we'll move to South Africa and take a look at a historical background. In 1806, British took over this region. They were attracted by rich mineral reserves and gold and diamonds. During this period, they ended slavery, but began kind of a conquest for control of the region. This included battling with the Afrikaners, the farming communities of Dutch origination. Afrikaners were forced to migrate to the northeastern interior, where they continued their exploitation of tribal and ethnic groups. and met much resistance in forcing their control of the agricultural land. The Zulus were eventually defeated in 1838 in the Battle of Blood River. The British annexed the Orange Free State and Transvaal regions. They suppressed the Dutch Boers in the Anglo-Boer War from 1899 to 1902. Legitimization of apartheid in South Africa, 1948 to 1989. Actually, apartheid began prior to this time. In 1913, the Native Land Act was provided for the restriction of Africans to 10% of the country's land area, and much of this land area was the least productive land. They were denied land ownership rights outside of reserves provided for them. The land share increased to 14% in 1936, but did not provide much better land for the native population. In 1948, the National Party gained control of the country. This was more of a European heritage-based political party. They instituted a series of laws to enforce apartheid or separateness or apartness. They began slowly with petty apartheid. They legislative acts that impact people's lives by discouraging races from using the same public facilities. They prohibited mixed race marriages. They forced relocation, and they passed laws to restrict intra-country travel. The transition period of apartheid from 1989 to 1993 was partially a result of the end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the USSR, which led to Cuban disengagement in Namibia. The Sullivan Principles had been put into place by the United States as well as other Western nations, were anti-apartheid and provided economic sanctions on South Africa due to the apartheid policies. And these sanctions severely impacted the South African economy. Meanwhile, unrest within the country increased costs for security as a more cohesive resistance to the white majority rule began to expand. The President de Klerk, the European heritage president, began to initiate changes. He released Nelson Mandela from prison. He legalizes some of the banned political parties, including the African National Congress, or the ANC, the South African Communist Party, the Pan-African Congress. There was a new constitution, a new Bill of Rights provided as the ANC assumed power. Nelson Mandela became president and signed the new Constitution and Bill of Rights into law in 1996. Essentially, the former President de Klerk paved the way for the demise of what had been the dominant political structure. After this time, he became one of the two deputy presidents under Nelson Mandela following the 1994 democratic elections. The ANC triumphs again in 2004 elections, and the National Party, the one that had provided for the apartheid for so many years, after an attempt at reinvention, is more bound and expires a few years later. Just a shell of the previous potent political strength that it had in prior times. Post-apartheid South Africa, under Nelson Mandela, provided land reform, including the Reconstruction and Development Program of 1994 that was designed to provide basic needs of water, electricity, education, transportation, and communication, as well as promoting democratization. The Restitution of Land Acts, also of 1994, permitted the government to investigate land claims and restore land to those who unjustly lost land during the apartheid period. The Masakan campaign during this time also encouraged community support of human resource investments. That this was a attempt at a cooperation in terms of encouraging the population to provide for themselves with government assistance and direction. In the post-apartheid period, there was a restructuring of provinces in South Africa. Post-apartheid division of provinces was designed to provide tribal and ethnic homeland regions, and it was aimed at promoting regional autonomy with political representation. In addition, each of these new provinces was provided a city that was designated and designed to direct economic activity and trade. More recently, there has been the Spatial Development Initiative, or SDI areas. This map is on page 400 of your text. These areas were designed for regional economic development and to strengthen global trade. And many of these SDIs focused on specific economic activities such as mining, energy and chemicals, agriculture, tourism, maybe particular industries such as the auto industry, aluminum production, chemicals, agritourism, as well as a high-tech corridor and transportation networks with international cooperation and transportation regions. Traditionally, Southern Africa has been very dependent upon South Africa for transportation and export. And more recently, modern development has provided a way for many of the countries that had formerly been dependent on South Africa to avoid that type of trade with Southern Africa and try and provide that trade for themselves. A good example of that is the development of transportation facilities in Walvis Bay in Namibia. However, much of the region is still highly dependent upon the well-developed trade infrastructure in South Africa, as well as the transportation routes that have traditionally driven goods from neighboring countries through South Africa to take advantage of the transportation facilities and harbors that are of greater economic importance in South Africa. So a summary of our chapter. Sub-Saharan Africa has an enduring legacy marked by ancient civilizations that were major centers of commerce, culture, learning, and technological innovation. An immediate challenge confronting sub-Saharan African countries is the severity of environmental and forest degradation caused by such human-related factors as slash-and-burn agriculture, logging, fuel wood consumption as an energy force, as well as the prevalence of resource extraction as an economic activity. The regions of the West, Central, and East Africa, like Southern Africa, exhibit considerable diversity in their environmental and ethnic characteristics. Southern Africa is undergoing social, political, and economic reform. South Africa remains the most important economic force in the region. Regional organizations throughout Africa coordinate greater cooperation, stability, and are designed to expand trade and improve the economies. That's it for Chapter 8, and we'll talk to you again soon as we move into Chapter 9.